Hey everybody, Stu Smith here with another Tactical Fitness Report, and today we have a great guest on, and name is Kirk Parsley, Dr. Kirk Parsley, a former Navy SEAL and now doctor who specializes in one of the most important, if not the most important, recovery tools that we have in our arsenal, that is sleep. So, hey Doc, thank you for coming on.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. Does me
So,
no good to blather if nobody's listening, so I need other people's platforms.
well,
I
let's talk a
appreciate it.
little bit about what you do, but before we do, let's just hear a little bit about your journey. A lot of my listeners are on younger side that are considering a special ops career. Many of
Yep.
them want to be combat medics.
Yep.
What was your journey like whenever you were a high school kid wanting to serve? When did that idea pop in your head?
Yeah. So I grew up in rural Texas. Dirt poor. Literally only had shoes during the school year. That kind of scene. But very blue collar, patriotic family. It was just kind of assumed if you were a healthy man that you're going to go do your time in the military,
Okay.
whatever you did didn't matter, but it's kind of your patriotic duty. And we knew it made men out of boys. And yeah, so I always knew I would do the military. I didn't really know what. And my parents divorced when I was like weeks old. So I didn't have a father figure. I didn't know I just didn't know.
Gotcha.
And I did I played football. One of my football coaches was a world-class power lifter. He saw some potential in me. He coached me on powerlifting. I started competing in powerlifting in high school. And I did a lot of martial arts. So I did some wrestling, I did some taekwondo, and I did some boxing. And my boxing coach was the Marine recruiter of my town, a little town of about 5,000 people. And so it was just always kind of assumed that I was going to go Marines, Marine recon, probably because I loved the water. I was a lifeguard, I lifeguard at the pool, lifeguard at the local lakes. And, I was always out in the water, get down to the Gulf anytime I could, swimming in reservoirs, water skiing, like whatever, just love the water. The Heartbreak Ridge movie had been out, and Marine Recon, that's cool, they were badasses. So I kind of always figured that was what it was going to be. And I was really into girls, and I was really into cars. That's how I made money. I flipped cars. I'd go to find people had their junk car out in their front yard and say, like, hey, how much you want for that car? And they'd be like, hey, if you take it out of here, like 90% of the time, like, you take it out of here, it's yours. It's yours. Oh, yeah. And then I'd go put $1,500 into it and sell it for $3,000, and I'd do that over and over and over again. That's how I made money. So I had a 1973 Mach 1 with a 351 Cleveland. It was a badass car, and we had we had the little drag racing on the weekends kind of thing, and you'd drive down to the end of dead end roads, and everybody turn their headlights on and drink beer, listen to the radio. Like, there's nothing to do.
Wait, let me stop you right there, because your growing up sounds just like mine.
Yeah.
Except for I was in a few states over in North Florida.
Yeah.
The swamplands of North Florida, playing football, had a powerlifting coach, and swimming in lakes and rivers. And every now and then I made it to the Gulf. And
I feel like a lot of team guys have the same path, very similar paths. Now the one thing that sets me apart from a lot of guys is I was a horrible student. I mean, a horrible student.
Wow.
My mom had remarried. I had a really, really, really abusive home life, kind of thing where the cops were at your house every week. It just wasn't conducive to studying. And I stayed up late working on cars and whatever. And I started getting D's and F's in like third grade. And my stepfather told me I was stupid, and my teachers told me I was stupid, and I believed I was stupid. And so I was like, all right, well, if you're going to be stupid, you got to be tough, right? So like, I'm going to be tough. And so I was going to be bigger and stronger and more fierce than everybody else, more capable, and every other capacity. I obviously I knew I was good at mechanical shit, so I wasn't, I wasn't a moron.
Some
I just
skills,
like
yeah.
I wasn't academic, and so I ended up going to 4 years of high school. After 4 years of high school, I had enough credits to be a sophomore,
Oh,
and so I dropped out of high school when all my classmates graduated. I just went and got a GED and I joined the military. Now, it was right before I joined the military. That documentary, you probably saw it because you're close enough to my age. The documentary, 48 Hours, it was like 60 Minutes. It was like one of those journalism documentaries, and they covered buds.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
I forget
that.
I forget which buds class it was, but it was Tom Crimmins was kind of like the honor man of the class and like the hard guy that everybody followed. And I watched that video on VHS, right, on the VHS tape. And I watched that video like 20 times, and they kept saying, this is the toughest training in the world. This is the hardest training in the world. Like Rambo couldn't make it through this training. And I was like, well, obviously we know what I'm doing. So I literally waited for the day that I knew the Marine recruiter wasn't going to be at the recruiting station, and I went down and I joined the Navy to be a SEAL. And fortunately, I was there right at the beginning of the dive fair program. So I think I was the first. I think literally I was the first dive fair kind of.
Well, that's probably what, like 88.
88. Yep.
Yeah.
So it was. I actually joined in December of 87.
Okay.
And then I left in the early summer of 88. And so then when I got to boot camp, the way the dive fair program worked is it gave you 3 chances to take the test.
Right.
Because a lot of people fail, choke on the test or whatever. Right. And then it gave you like E3 out of boot camp and E4 out of A school. But the biggest thing was that it gave you guaranteed shot to go to A school because to go to buds, because before that you could smoke the test and your gaining command could be like, nah, we need you. Like you got to wait 2 years and go later. So I went and took the test. There's a guy there, Petty Officer First Class Winkler, had been in for like 30 years. So he'd been in first class, I think probably 7 or 8 times. Right. And there's him, a couple other dive motivators there. This was in Florida. And I took the test and just, crushed it.
Nice.
Because, I know, like, that's what I was good at, man. I was a good athlete, and like, I was gonna crush it. And so he pulled me aside after the test and he said, hey, we have this new dive fair program and people get to take the test multiple times. And we have a training program in the morning for them where they get to come in and they get some coaching on whatever they're weak on. And you did such a good job on the test. Like, would you want to come in and coach? And so another thing I didn't say is my last year of high school, I lived in a gym, like in a commercial gym. Because my mother had remarried and moved off, and I wanted to stay there until I finished high school. So I lived in a gym, and I got ACE certified, and I was a trainer. So I was this assistant manager of this gym at 17 years old, and I'd train people. And like I said, I'd had a powerlifting coach, and so I knew how to work out, and I'd been a lifeguard, so I knew how to do the side stroke really well. It's actually it's still the only thing I can do well. Like I've done triathlons and shit, and I still can't do the crawl well. Like I'm not a good swimmer, but I'm great at side stroke. I can do it for 1,000 miles, and I can do it as fast as I can do freestyle. So I smoked the test, and he said, "Do you want to come coach?" I'm like, "Sure." So it was supposed to be like an hour and a half, and it ended up, about 2 weeks into it, I was there for the first 4 hours of every day. So I'd missed like all the stupid shit of boot camp at the beginning. And I just worked with guys and helped them train. And then I'd sit in their office and talk to them. They'd drink coffee and I sit there and talk to them about whatever. They'd tell me SEAL stories, and they were all Vietnam era guys. And this is how naive I was. One day they said something to me about either jump pay or hazard duty pay. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, well, you get more money if and they try to explain special pays to me. And I was like, they're going to pay me to be here? And he just starts roaring like, he's like, what did you just say? And he took me around to every office. Like, I mean, 20, he's like, tell him what you just said. Tell him what, and I literally had no idea I was going to get paid. I was like, why would I get paid? Right. Like, I'm going to go there. I'm going to train. They're going to give me, eat at the galley. They're going to give me uniform. They're going to give me barracks to live in. And I'm going to be training for war. Or I'm going to be in war. Like, what the hell would I do with money? Never entered in my mind I was going to get paid. So anyway, that's so how funny. Naive I was. And so anyway, I did all that. I got promoted in boot camp anyway. I finished first in my A school class. I got promoted out of there anyway. So the dive fair did nothing for me, but it was good. I was glad to have it,
sure.
Just in case.
Now, was your A school corpsman?
No, actually I was gunner's mate.
Okay.
And so in the teams, I was a 60 gunner and first lieutenant rep. Yeah. Oh. I had the mechanical skills, I worked on the boats and motors and trucks and whatever, and all the gear. And I was the lug wrench, I started buds at 230 pounds. I was a big dude, and
that's huge.
And so that's the guy you give the 60, and that's the guy you tell to carry the motors up the beach and all that stuff. Right. So and I was mechanical. So that was a good fit. And I did that, until 94. And then, I wasn't married yet, but I was engaged. I'd met the girl. I just, fallen in love. I was in during the Hollywood days, Clinton administration. We didn't have, we had the Gulf War, but it was like, I didn't go. I went to the Philippines. I deployed to the Philippines on that. And, so, I just felt like, either I'm going to keep doing the same training trips over and over and over again, or I'm going to go do something else. And so I didn't know what I was going to do, but I figured I'd go to college and maybe be a physical therapist or an athletic trainer or something kind of aligned with sports medicine. And started working at San Diego Sports Medicine Center. Became a PT assistant. Pretty quickly decided that wasn't what I wanted to do, but I had San Diego Sports Medicine Center was a healthcare mecca. We had like every kind of healthcare professional you could possibly imagine worked in this facility. And so I got to work with everybody, and I got to see what everybody did. And I got to be really good friends with the doctors because, I'd been in the military essentially 7 years, and then I had to go to junior college for a couple of years because I didn't have a high school diploma. I couldn't even get into a 4-year university. So the doctors were only a few years older than me. They're like 3 or 4 years older than me. So I became good friends with those guys, and they're like, you should go to medical school. And I'm like, dude, I'm a high school dropout. Like, let's be realistic. I'm like, like slow down. So I'm having this conversation with them out in the hallway, and the doctor that owned that facility, his name is Dr. Rice, Lee Rice. And he was the first sports medicine physician in America. So he actually was the founder of that subspecialty. And he was the sports med doc for the Chargers. We had the San Diego Gulls at that time. We had a basketball team. I can't remember the name of that. And then he did all the San Diego State sports and all of USD's sports. And so he hears me talking to the doctors, and he comes out and he says, Kirk, the question isn't, could you get into medical school? The question is, would you go if you could get in? And I was like, yeah, of course I'd go. And he goes, then you have to try, right? And so I'm like, I essentially got guilted into it. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to try then. So I said, I'm going to do it. And I got a 4.0 all through college, and transferred to UCSD, found out like I actually wasn't dumb. I just hadn't applied myself before. And then applied to the military's medical school in Bethesda, got accepted to that. I was already married, already had kids. Made sense to go there over anywhere else, right?
That's great. Yeah.
They're going to pay me instead of me paying somebody else. And then my wife didn't have to work when I was in medical school. It wasn't huge, but I was an O1E. So I made like 75 grand a year or something. It was enough to support my kids. And, we lived in Gaithersburg, Maryland, had a little brownstone, uh, condo. My wife didn't have to work. I went to medical school, and the deal, like
That's a good deal.
Basically 2 years of working for them for every year they train you, kind of thing. Right.
Sure.
So it's about the way the military works. And so you have to be a doctor for them for 8 years after you graduate. Which at that time would put me so close to retirement. It's like, well,
Yeah.
no brainer. Yeah. And I figured I'd get back to the SEAL teams, and give back to the community that really shaped me, shaped me I mean, it really just defined me as who I would be, as a man. And all I ever knew about sports medicine, like our genre, like we didn't have any medicine at the teams. So all I ever knew was, the only thing I knew about medicine was injuries, right? It was orthopedic injuries. Like yeah. I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon or a sports medicine doctor, because that's all I thought about when I thought about medicine. Like that's all I knew about it. That's all I cared about. And so since I'd worked at San Diego Sports Medicine Center the whole time I was in college, I worked there for 6 years. And then I'd get to the SEAL teams, and they had just gotten their money. The way it takes 10 years to get any program funded. So they just got the tactical athlete program funded, and they were going to build the very first sports medicine facility on the West Coast, the first one we'd ever had. And so it's a perfect fit. And they're like, well, hey, your background, your pedigree, you should be in charge of this build out. Obviously I wasn't building it, right, but I was supervising the build out of it. And then I was an integral part of the team that was hiring everybody. So we hired our first nutritionist and our first athletic trainer and our first strength.
That was the start of the human performance side, right?
Yeah. And hired all of the staff for that.
Nice.
And we had the tactical athlete performance center, which was down at Tradette, which was just working out, and that was run by Josh Everett, who was a CrossFit superstar, and Zach Weatherford, who was exercise physiologist, and Cheryl, I can't remember her last name, some Polish last name. She was our nutritionist, but like we got the creme de la creme, right? Because SEALs were this was 2009, so SEALs were already legends and had killed Bin Laden, and everybody knew who the hell they were, and everybody wanted to work with them. So we got guys from professional sports teams. We got, people from D1 colleges, Olympic training center. Like we got great people. And then of course I was the dumbest guy around. I had ortho rounds coming through. I had pain rounds coming through. We had chiropractic coming through. We had PTs, we had athletic trainers, we had exercise physiologists, we had nutrition. So I was the dumbest guy. What do you do then? Put me in charge, right? So now I supervise it. They're like, well, you should supervise all these people who know more than you. I'm like, yeah, let's do that. That'll be cool. And so the way it was built, I don't know if you saw the Group 1 facility, but
yeah.
So you had the proper rehab on one side, and then there's a hallway connected to what we call the bridge gym, and that was for guys who were past rehab but weren't ready to go
making the transition.
So So that was the bridge gym, and they'd work with Jason Jadtu and our other trainers, Rogo and all those guys. And my office was in that hallway. And what would happen is, team guys, like they don't tell medical providers shit, because worst thing you can do is put them on the bench, and who can put you on the bench faster than anybody is the medical provider. So they'd come in, I'd been a SEAL recently enough to where there were still a lot of guys there that I'd been a SEAL with, and guys I'd trained with, guys I'd deployed with. I had a good reputation. Guys trusted me. They'd come in, they'd shut the door and go, hey, let me tell you what's really going on with me. Right. And they started listing out this litany of symptoms, their mood, their motivation, their attention, their verbal fluency, their ability to say what they thought, the ability to remember anything. They're all leaving their house 3 and 4 times in the morning to, get in the car, pull out, go, oh, I forgot my badge, go and get their ID, come back, start driving. Ah, shit, I forgot my backpack. Right. And same story. Everybody's telling me this. They're super moody. They're snappy with their kids, snappy with their wives. They're pissed off at work. They're having, they conflict with their coworkers, body comp shifts. They weren't old enough for this. They were in their early 30s, most of them, some in their late 30s. But doing everything the nutritionist said, doing everything the strength and conditioning coach said, like doing everything by the book, and getting weaker, getting fatter, getting slower, getting dumber, and just like fix me, right? Help me perform the way I feel like I should perform. And I was an MD. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I know how to recognize and treat disease, and you don't have any diseases. So
right. Yeah.
I don't know what the hell to do here. So I just started like taking these huge lab panels, like 98, literally 98 lab markers,
wow,
17 tubes of blood. I sent them over to the hospital to get this blood draw. BUMED eventually caught onto this and cracked down on me, like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you're ordering $2,000 worth of labs on everybody who you see. And I was like, this is because I don't have any idea, right? And so they come in, they tell me their story, and everybody's story was the same. By the time 10, and the way the teams work, like, you're helpful to one guy, he tells his buddy, they tell, and within a month, I'd had 100 guys in my office with the same story. And it was pretty far into it, to be honest. It's 30, 40 patients into it. Some guy said something about Ambien, and I remember, there's certain times, certain moments in your life that you just remember, you just like so clearly. And I was wearing, like, hardly ever wore khakis, but I'm wearing khakis. I'm sitting in my office. I remember exactly where I was sitting, at my leg crossed. I was writing my note on my other leg, and I was like, he said something about Ambien, and I was like, seems like a lot of guys said that. And I just remember putting a little note up in the top corner to look up Ambien, look at how many guys. So then I go back through, and I'd done everything with shadow files, right? Because these guys were trusting me not to disqualify them. So I was keeping everything in my office until I figured it out. And so I was charting on them, but it wasn't going in their medical record yet.
Right.
I had a shadow file for everybody. So I go through the shadow files. Every single guy who had been in my office was taking Ambien. And I thought, I wonder if that could be something, right? And I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't have a single class on sleep in medical school. I didn't know any more about sleep than the gardener, like, I was like, I don't know, like, let's see. So I started looking up Ambien, and fortunately what had happened, so when drug companies pass, like, apply for a drug approval through the FDA, they own the research that they give the FDA, right? The government doesn't do the research. The pharmaceutical company does their own research, and then they give the FDA what they want to give them, and they don't give them what they don't want to give them. However, as soon as they get sued, as soon as that drug comes up for any kind of issue, then they got to start forking over the research that they didn't want to fork over. And so fortunately, this was right about the same time that people had started getting successfully sued for Ambien. Because what was happening is causing this dissociation, and it was basically dissociating like the lizard brain from the neocortex.
Oof.
And then they're operating off the lizard brain, which is what? Reproductive, fighting, feeding, and right. So fighting, feeding, fucking.
3 Fs.
Yeah. Right. And so people were taking Ambien and getting in their cars and driving to the casino and gambling away their life savings and coming home and going to bed and waking up the next morning and having no idea that they did that until their life savings was gone. And they're like, what are you talking about? And then, or, driving down and picking up prostitutes, or like going down to their kitchen and eating, all their kids, ho-hos and whatever.
Risky behavior. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that led me to thinking, okay, well, what else is this drug doing? And so then I started educating myself on sleep. And the thing I had going for me was, like I said, the SEALs already had their reputation nationally. And so I could call anybody, and I could be like, hey, I read your book. I saw your TED talk. I saw you lecture. And I call them and say, I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams. I was wondering if I could come train with you, or if I could consult with you, or if you have any other references I could read about this, and here's what I'm dealing with. You have any ideas? And so I learned sort of this integrative functional medicine, whatever they want to call it. They change the name all the time. And it's kind of longevity medicine is what it is now, which was really the same thing as integrated functional. And before that it was alternative medicine, whatever. So it's that non-traditional side where you're looking at really sort of evolution, ancestral behavior, and like how did we evolve, and like how can we, what are we doing in current society that's getting in the way of that, and what can we remove, and how can we mitigate? And so I started all that, and I thought, well, first I thought this was adrenal fatigue, and I was treating everybody with adrenal fatigue, and I was giving people Myers cocktails with different additives in it, and treating them with supplements. And I got in trouble for that too, because apparently that was beyond my scope as a medical doctor. I wasn't allowed to give vitamin IVs. And then I saw I never said this, but when those 98 lab panel markers came back, they looked like metabolically. If I gave those labs to a colleague and said, tell me who you think this guy is, they would say 55 to 65-year-old dude who's 40, 50 pounds overweight and pre-diabetic. Like that's what they would have thought.
Damn.
I'd be like, nope, it's a 28-year-old active duty SEAL with 6-pack abs and whatever in it. So I got to learn a lot. And at some point I said, I learned enough about sleep and what happens when you sleep, and how, because they'd had to turn over the data for the real research for Ambien, we knew how much it interfered what we call the sleep architecture. So there's a way that sleep looks on a sleep study that we call sleep architecture when we put it in this hypnogram. And as you distort that, you're getting less quality of sleep, right? So you should be in deep sleep for a certain amount of time. You should be in REM sleep for a certain amount of time. That should cycle. It should look a certain way. And what it turns out is when you take sleep drugs, it destroys about 80% of REM sleep, and it'll take away up to 40% of deep sleep. And then alcohol does exactly the opposite of that. So
what do you mean opposite? What does it take away? What does alcohol take away?
Alcohol will take away about 80% of deep sleep.
Oh, okay.
And about 20 to 40% of REM sleep. So when I would send these guys in, because team guys, if one's what the average guy's fake, then you need at least two, and if two's good, three's probably better. So they're overdosing on the drug to begin with, and they're usually taking it with a couple of cocktails, right, or at least a few beers, and then they're going to sleep, and they're sleeping for like 4 hours, and then 5 hours, and they're waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, can't go back to sleep, and they're like, well, I'm going to go in, I'm going to work out. I'm going to work out really hard. I'm going to go straight through. I'm not going to take any naps. I'm not going to take any breaks. And when I come home tonight, I'll be tired, and I'll get a good night's sleep. And I say, like, how long you been doing that? And I'm like, 3 years. Like, tonight's the night. Keep going. Right? Like it's going to click eventually, I think. So, so anyway, I said, I learned enough about this, and I'm like, their testosterone's low, their insulin sensitivity's low, their growth hormone's low, like all of their anabolic hormones are low, and all of their catabolic inflammatory stress hormones are high.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, this is all supposed to be balanced during sleep, because I'd learned enough. I'm like, where this all gets realigned to sleep. So let's get rid of the sleep drug. And because they'd been taking sleep drugs, I couldn't just say, quit taking the sleep drugs, right? I mean, I had to give them something else. And so I worked with a bunch of alternative providers, and I'd ask them, hey, like, what do you do for sleep? And I did my own research, and I came up with a combination of about 6 different sleep supplements, just nutritional supplements that were associated with sleep.
Like
and
sleep remedy.
There's the end product of it. And that's why I'm Doc Parsley, right? Because everybody in the team calls everybody medical is doc,
yeah.
Right? So It doesn't matter if you're a corpsman or a doctor, you're doc. And so they called it Doc Parsley Sleep Cocktail because it was just a bunch of shit. And this was pre-Amazon, and
it's very useful too, though. I mean, this is some very useful stuff.
So in Coronado, you remember, I mean, you had like Boney's down at the end that sold some stuff, and then you had like that one Walgreens or CVS or something in the middle, and that's kind of it. So people were having to leave the island to buy the supplements, and, and this would come, and one would be in a 90-day supply, and one would be in a 30-day supply, and one would be capsules, and one would be powder, and one would be a liquid. And they're like, Doc, dude, you gotta make something out of this. You got to do something for us here. Like, this is a pain in the ass. Like, I can't keep up with it. And so I tried while I was in to get some people to like help me package it in a better way and make it specifically for it. And I talked to a few supplement companies to try to get something made for us. And I don't know if, were you in, when did you get out?
I was in from 91 until 99.
Okay. So, yeah, so the teams were doing these pre and post retreats. Cause like after you left, like after 9/11, they started deploying as teams as opposed to like we just did a couple of platoons from every team. So they started deploying as a team. And what they would do is before the deployment, they would take everybody out to a resort with the whole SEAL team and their families. And then they would do these lectures, and there would be there was a pre-deployment, so they called it a pre-retreat and a post-retreat. So before they deploy, obviously, quarter, 20% maybe of the guys, this is gonna be their first deployment. It's gonna be their family's first deployment. And so what are the resources they have? What should they expect? What are going to be strains on the family?
That's smart.
Right. And they would bring in these guest lecturers who had some cachet so that make it interesting and credible. And so they brought in guys like Rob Wolf and Chris Kresser and John Wellborn and Dominic D'Agostino, and people like this would come in and lecture about nutrition and fitness. And you brought in Dave Grossman to talk about the psychology of killing. And then they bring in family support things to talk to, like, here are the things you're going to experience with your marriage. These are going to be these strains. Here's the support you have. And so they did these pre and post retreats, and they started bringing me in to lecture about sleep. So I got to meet all these highfalutin influencers in the health and wellness space. And I was the only guy talking about sleep. And they were like, hey, I got to be friends with all these guys. And they started saying, hey man, we got this symposium coming up. We need somebody to talk about sleep. And so I was taking leave and going and lecturing about sleep and going on people's podcast. Went on Rob Wolf's podcast.
Yep. That's what I saw you. I saw on Rob Wolf's, Mark Divines, saw your TED talk.
And so, so he was actually at my house because we were doing a retreat. We're going to do a retreat the next morning, and he's sitting at my house and he's like, oh crap, I'm supposed to be doing a podcast. You want to be my podcast guest? And I was like, what's a podcast? And so we went upstairs in my house. We balanced his little Mac Air book on, between us on the couch, and we just talked. And that's how the world learned about Doc Parsley. And then that just escalated into more and more lectures and symposiums. And then I became the sleep guy by default. But anyways, to round the story out, I got everybody off of I got everybody off of Ambien. And when I was doing their sleep studies, because of what I just told you, the way the sleep architecture gets destroyed by alcohol and drugs, these guys were coming back with 99.9% stage 2 sleep, which isn't the way it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
And so I got all these guys off of Ambien and got them to control their alcohol. Like, I didn't try to tell everybody to stop drinking, but, like, let's minimize it, do it this way. And, gave them a plan for it. And what do you know? People's testosterone quadrupled, people's growth hormone quadrupled.
Nice.
Their mood issues went away. Their sex drive issues went away. They're like everything. I had, he's a CEO of Team 5 at the time, in his early 40s, getting PRs in the weight room, getting PRs on the PT test. And I mean, it's a way bigger effect than I thought it was going to be, even, to be honest. And I was like, yeah, this actually works. Cause I wanted to just go in and fix everything. I'm a medical doctor.
Yeah,
I was like,
of course.
Their testosterone's low. I want to give them testosterone. Well, they're not going to let me give them testosterone. Right.
Right.
So I'm like, all right, well, how am I going to do this? So anyway, I, kind of figured, and actually my lectures, I talked mainly about anabolic activity. I talked mainly about testosterone and growth hormone and DHT and insulin sensitivity and stress hormones and how that was affecting their performance. and that sleep was a way to get this performance back. And so it was a sleight of hand. It was almost a way for me to talk about what I really wanted to do was give them hormones. I couldn't. So this was like the next best thing. And then after a while, after drinking my own Kool-Aid for a while and learning more and more and researching more and more and working with patients more, I was like, oh no, this actually is it. Like this is actually the solution. And it was about, it was a 90% solution for 90% of the guys. Like it really was. I had over, by the time I left, I had over 400 patients that had come to see me for this. And I had one guy on testosterone. And, and he was like a Warcom 06 and almost 50 years old or something like, so yeah. I didn't need it. And then that led to my private practice now, my consulting practice, which is really the same thing. It's performance-based medicine, but it's mainly about lifestyle. Like it's 90% lifestyle. And then, towards the end of the year, we start adding in supplements that they need and pharmaceuticals if they need that. It's like at the very end, hormones at the very end. And most guys don't need it until about 50,
Okay.
That's about the age. And then once you hit 50, it's just like, I can do all my tricks and you're not going to be where you want to be if you still want to really be getting after it. So that's a super long intro, but that's the full Doc Parsley story right there.
No, that's great. I mean, that covered so much past intro. Yeah, really perfect. And because you have been my guy for sleep. Like whenever I write something about sleep or I'm talking something about sleep and recovery, always go to your docparsley.com website.
Yep.
Click the blog section, and there are literally over 100 great articles there that you have, and podcasts as well,
right,
of you talking about so many different areas where sleep is important, from the new family with newborns to ADHD to alcohol, everything that you just mentioned. And
yeah,
it is amazing the diversity that you have on your website, linking sleep to all of it.
Yeah. And it's actually, you run a business, right? It's the worst sales pitch in the world because it's, hey, this is it. Like this one thing does it all. And like, you sound like a snake oil salesman, but I'm like, no, listen, I can explain it to you. You tell me what you value and I can explain to you how sleep is directly related to that and how your performance, your ability to get that future that you want, I can explain it to you. I can explain it exactly, like down to the molecular level. I can tell you why sleep is the most important thing for you. And when I first started lecturing, I started off with those 4 pillars of health: sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation.
Oh, yeah.
And about 5 years ago, I switched it to say there's 3 pillars of health. There's nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation, but they all sit on this platform called sleep. That's the foundation. If you don't have that foundation, the other stuff really doesn't matter that much.
That's the best mitigate.
Yeah. That's the best kind of mitigation you can do. Like if you're in a job where your life is such that you just aren't going to get good sleep, optimizing those other 3 pillars is like, that's your best bet, but you're still going to pay a price for it. Like you are not going to be optimal, and your life isn't going to be as long, and you're not going to be as happy, and you're not going to perform as well. Like that's just the truth. If you can't sleep well, you can't recover well. If you can't recover well, you aren't getting better at anything.
Absolutely.
The only time we get better at anything is while we sleep, right? When you work out, you don't get stronger when you work out.
Nope.
You get weaker when you work out, right? You're damaging your tissues. You're actually, when you work out hard enough, you're actually rupturing and killing muscle cells. And when you recover, your brain and body use the template of what you've been doing to try to fortify your body against that, to be able to do more of that. So if you've been doing strength training, your muscle cells are going to grow back a little thicker and a little stronger with a little more actin, and they're going to be able to contract a little bit harder so that the next time you do that weight, it doesn't rupture the muscle cell. And that's how you get stronger. And the same thing with endurance. You're going to come back with more mitochondrial, more efficient ATP production. Like you're going to do that. When you learn, you don't solidify anything you learn. whether it's muscle memory or something purely cognitive, and whether we're talking about recall or recognition, it doesn't matter. Everything goes in your working memory while you're awake. And then the more you rehearse that throughout the day, you can kind of you can slowly start putting it into long-term memory. But when it really goes into long-term memory is when you sleep. And when you sleep, you put it into long-term memory. And the more important the information is, the more you rehearsed it during the day and the more times you sleep with that on your mind, you form these durable pathways. So you think about it, you're taking something from maybe like a little rodent trail, and then you're making it into a footpath, and then you're making it into a sidewalk, and then you're making it into a street, and then you're making it into a superhighway. And now you have these really durable connections between these bits of information in your brain. And now there's so many connections to it from so many different angles. I actually know that information now, and I can work with it, and I can think about it from different angles, and I can see how other things impact it and how it impacts other things. I actually know that information now, and I can do something with it, as opposed to something I learned in school that I memorized for a test and dropped off, right? So all your durable memories. And then the other thing is everything emotional that happens to you, good or bad, right? Everything emotional happens to you during the day. While you're in REM sleep, we do what's called emotional categorization. So if you wake up and you have a fight with your wife over dirty dishes in the sink, well, that's a nothing burger, right? That should just go away, right? By the time you're done arguing about it, that should be gone. If you're sleep deprived, if you're running around on a lot of stress hormones, and if you aren't getting good quality sleep, and you don't emotionally categorize it that night or the next night or the next night, all of a sudden that becomes a really big deal. And the next time there's dishes in the sink, you're talking about divorce. And you're like, whoa, how did we get here? Right. And so you can see how that would apply. You could see how that would apply to, a combat veteran, right? I mean, somebody who's going out and doing emotional shit every day. And if you aren't recovering from that, like, not only are you getting weaker and getting worse at your job, if you aren't emotionally categorizing that stuff, this thing's built up. And this is where I think PTSD really comes from. Because PTSD is simply it's inappropriate attention to past experiences, and it's leading to triggers, and it's leading to you behaving in ways that you never process. It's leading to an emotional trigger that's just happening, and your stress hormones are going crazy, and all sorts of things are happening with your sensory and your physiology that you never even realized happened. You don't even know what the damn trigger was. And it's because you haven't emotionally categorized this thing. Now, the other thing that we have in the teams, I don't want to oversimplify this, and all special forces do have this, and all military to some degree, and all law enforcement to some degree, is we have these overpressurization blast injuries, right? So you think about one of the guys I studied with when I was at the teams was a guy named Mark Gordon, who was working with TBIs with pugilists in NFL. So traumatic brain injuries from concussive, like actually physically hitting your head on something, or something hitting your head. And I started going, well, I have a guy with TBI, and I wanted to learn more about TBI. And I found this article in JAMA. It was from 3 major universities like Oxford and Harvard, and I think maybe somewhere in Israel or something. But I mean, it was a legitimate high-end study. And they were doing something called DTIs. And that's this imaging that's so clear you can see a single neuronal tract break. And that would be a very minor TBI. Like, there's no way that would result in a performance change because it's one neuron out of billions, right? But you could see a single neuronal tract break, and they would say, okay, that's a minor TBI. Well, the threshold for that was 1.09 Gs. And they were getting that from the acceleration changes on a roller coaster. So you think about our fast boats, you think about hard parachute openings, you think about fast roping, you think about ton of the stuff we do. I'm like,
overpressure of weapons shooting.
Right. And then I started thinking about the pressure of the weapons, and I'm like, well, let's look into that. So you go in a kill house with concrete walls. If you're shooting an M4, every bullet you shoot and every bullet the guy next to you shoots, and there's 4 guys in the room, every bullet that gets shot is 35 Gs. If you're in the back of a Humvee, somebody shooting a 50 cal, it's 65 Gs. for every round. And how many you get into that? Yeah. And then you look at things like door breaches. You look at great teams, fast boats, they average 60 Gs, right? And this isn't over pressurization. This is an actual trauma.
Impact.
This is shaking your brain.
Yeah.
So they average 60 Gs. They peak over 100 Gs. A hard parachute opening is 3 to 4 Gs. A Carl Gustav, take a guess.
I have no idea.
So the shooter gets 200 Gs, the spotter gets 300 Gs.
Oh my God.
So how many TBIs do I have? 100%.
Everybody.
Every single guy has thousands of TBIs. And so that affects hormones too. That affects mood too. That affects memory. That affects cognition. That affects the function of the brain. So we had that as well. And that's what I do we were talking before we started. I do a lot of work with these foundations that are helping special forces guys afterwards. And we're doing a lot of work around that.
Now, what are you finding the, I guess, anabolic effects of sleep to all of these issues? I mean, what is happening when we sleep that fixes all that hormonally?
Right. All right. So first you need to talk about stress, because stress hormones, most people think of cortisol, and that's fine for me. That's simple. We'll stick with that. We'll call that the stress hormone. There's lots of stress hormones, but let's do that one. So cortisol gets a bad rap. It's the stress hormone. People are like, oh, cortisol, that's bad. Well, cortisol is great, right? Cortisol keeps you alive. Yeah. If you have zero cortisol, that's also called dead, right? So what cortisol does is it keeps you alert in proportion to your environment. Right. So if you're laying around on your couch reading a book, your cortisol is not very high. Yeah. Somebody crashes a car through the front of your house while you're laying on the couch reading a book, your cortisol goes all the way up to fight or flight. Somebody's shooting at you with a machine gun, fight or flight. Somebody wants to get in a fist fight with you, fight or flight. Car crash, fight or flight. There's not that many things that are really like truly fight or flight. Like fight or flight is the maximum amount of stress hormones you can possibly produce. Now, what happens during fight or flight? You marshal 100% of your resources to get away from that, whatever that one thing is. The car crash, the guy with the gun, the tiger, whatever the hell it is. To get away from that is all that matters. So you shut off everything that doesn't matter. So what doesn't matter? It doesn't matter if you can fight off infection. Doesn't matter if you can repair any damaged tissue. Doesn't matter if you can digest the food in your gut. Doesn't matter if your bladder is working. Doesn't matter if your kidneys are working. Doesn't matter if your liver's working. Doesn't matter if your brain's working, to be honestly.
That's right.
To be honest.
You're on that lizard brain.
You need to you need to work on that lizard brain, and you need to be impulsive, reflexive. So what happens? Your lungs dilate. While we're sitting here talking, we're using maybe 20% of our lung volume, probably closer to 10% of our lung volume. When you go into fight or flight, 100% of your lungs expand. You take in more oxygen. You start over-oxygenating your blood. I mean, you can only do 100%, but as you burn through, you're not depleting the way you would if you're just exercising. You release a ton of cortisol. Cortisol causes all your stored glucose that gets stored in what we call glycogen. That dumps into your bloodstream. Your reflexes get faster. Your pain threshold goes up. Your heart rate goes up. Your blood pressure goes up. Your pupils dilate. You take in more vision, even though you feel like you have tunnel vision because you're only thinking of that one thing, but you're actually taking in a bigger field of vision. All your capillaries completely constrict so that if you get cut, you don't bleed as much. You become superhuman. You're faster, you're stronger, you have more endurance, your reflexes are faster, you can take more pain, you react faster, like everything is better. So it seems like it'd be great to be able to harness that and do that all the time, right?
Right.
The reason you can't do that all the time is because this is what we call catabolic. This is 100% catabolic. You are using every resource in your body to get away from those few minutes or seconds or whatever it takes to get away from that. And you aren't doing anything anabolic. So you aren't producing testosterone, right? You aren't doing any sex hormones. You aren't doing any reproduction. You aren't doing any digestive. All the stuff that I talked about that restores you and replenishes you and nourishes your body, all that's gone. You're using everything to get away from that. Now, the exact opposite of that is deep sleep. when you're in deep sleep, lowest cortisol you'll have during your entire day. During any 24-hour period, the lowest it'll ever be is while you're in deep sleep. Almost non-existent. But it's the highest anabolic activity you'll have throughout the entire day. So that's when you're releasing 99% of all the testosterone you're going to release is going to happen while you're in deep sleep. 99% of all the growth hormone you're going to release. 99% of all the DHT conversion, that's dihydrotestosterone, the most anabolic form of testosterone. Your insulin sensitivity, that gets adjusted. Your appetite regulation, that gets adjusted. The hormone that comes from your fat to tell your brain how much fat you're carrying, that gets adjusted and set. Like all your thyroid, everything gets re-regulated. The hormones that control your kidney, the hormones that are controlling your liver, the hormones your liver are producing, all of that gets re-regulated during deep sleep. And it uses today as the template, right? So if you think about it, the entire reason I'm going to sleep tonight is to prepare myself for tomorrow. Right? I'm going to burn through my resources today. I'm going to get tired. I'm going to damage some things. I'm going to get fatigued. I'm going to build up some waste products. At the end of the day, I'm going to be tired and I'm going to go to sleep. And if I could recover 100%, I wouldn't age. I would wake up tomorrow exactly how I am today. Right? If I could recover 100%. When you're a kid, if you think about it, now kids need, kids sleep 12, 14 hours, right? You look at something between like 6 years old and 15 or 16 years old, most anabolic time in your life, these kids are sleeping 12, 14 hours. They're waking up every day better, right? They're not waking up just recovered. They're waking up stronger and taller and smarter and faster. Like they're actually improving every day. And then at some point in our life, around late 20s, early to mid 30s, all that kind of plateaus. And then we start going the other way and we don't recover 100% every night. But if we can recover 99.999999%, then we're just aging that 1/1,000,000th of a percent. But the contract you're born into, people don't want to hear this, but you're born into a contract. First thing, you're going to die. No one's ever gotten out of this alive. You are going to die. The other thing is it takes about 8 hours to recover from being awake for 16 hours. That's just the truth. You can't get away from it. You can't put butter in your coffee and wear glasses and use some kind of electronic gizmo and get away from that any more than you can do that to avoid death. You're going to die and you need 8 hours of sleep. If we can't get there, we have no place to start from. All right. So that's the truth. It takes 8 hours to recover. Now, what happens if instead of sleeping 8 hours tonight, I only sleep 6? Tomorrow still comes.
Right.
I only recovered 75% as much as I could have. So how am I going to get through tomorrow?
Well,
I'm going to increase my stress hormones.
Right.
And I'm going to be more catabolic and I'm going to use some of my body as a resource and I'm going to age faster. Right. Because if you think about it, what is aging? You're getting fatter, dumber, colder, and slower. Less resilient. You're losing muscle, you're gaining fat, you're losing bone density, you're losing metabolic flexibility, you're losing anabolic hormones, and you're enhancing stress hormones, and you're losing immune function. And aging in itself predisposes you to death. The older you are, the more likely you are to die from any cause, right? So if I'm 5 years old and I fall down a flight of stairs, the odds of me dying is pretty much 0. If I'm 95 and I fall down a flight of stairs, the odds of me dying is pretty close to 100%, right? So you can just think of aging as resiliency, right? It's your ability to cope with disease and injury and repair from it. So when I go to sleep and I lay down in bed and I'm wide awake, right? I'm in an awake state. And if you measure my brain waves, there's something called beta waves. Doesn't matter, but it's just like it's what awake brains look like. And I lay down in bed. The first thing I drift into is stage 1 sleep. Stage 1 sleep is when you're laying in bed and you can still hear somebody talking or the neighbor's barking dog or the television in the room, whatever. Like you can hear stuff and you're processing it somewhat, but you can tell it's a little different. And we know that phase. It's hard to describe, but it's just a little different. Like you aren't processing exactly. So really all that being asleep means is that I'm not paying attention to my senses anymore, right? My eyes still work, my ears still work, my nose still works, I can still taste, I can still feel sharp, cold, pain, but I'm just not paying attention to it, right? So my sensory goes away. That's my neocortex. So when you think of the human brain, that wrinkly, sulci kind of bit, that shape, that's what we call the neocortex. That's the part of the brain that makes us human. That's where all of our motor function is, and that's where all of our sensory is. That's how we interact with the world. The lizard brain is how we survive. So the neocortex sits on top of it, and this will keep you alive, right? This is brain dead on it, right? This is brain dead vegetable in a bed, but just this will keep you alive. The neocortex is how you interact with the world. So when you start slowing down the neocortex enough to where you're not really paying attention to the world, there's a barrier between you and your environment. You can be awakened, right? So if I shake you, or if I turn on a light, if I shake you, you can feel it, so you wake up. If I turn on a light, you can see it, so you wake up. I make a loud noise, you can hear it, you wake up. If you're unconscious, that doesn't happen. And unconscious doesn't look like sleep. If we're measuring your brain waves and lots of other stuff, it's a totally different state. So you go through stage 1, you go down to stage 2, we call that transition sleep. It's kind of technical why we call it that, but just think of that as transition. It's like taking us in between REM sleep and deep sleep. And then we go into deep sleep, stages 3 and 4, slow wave, what we call slow wave. So it's a much slower brainwave. And what it is our neocortex has lowered what's called the resting potential. So every nerve can fire, like whatever that nerve does, you can put enough, there's ions going in and out, right? There's charged material going in and out. When there's enough charge, that cell fires and it does what that cell does. And in a neuron, right, that's releasing some neurotransmitters and reacting and connecting with other neurons. So what we do is we lower that resting potential to where it takes a lot more ion exchange for that neuron to fire. And that is the slowing down of our brain and not paying attention. Now the sensory is still there, it just takes more to get the sensory. So that's stages 3 and 4 of sleep. You're truly asleep. You aren't paying attention to your environment whatsoever. Now as I said, you're releasing all these anabolic hormones. The astrocytes, so the neurons in your brain that form the structure, that hold the structure, they contract, they shrink down by about 30%, and they create all these little caverns, all these little pathways. So the cerebral spinal fluid can flow through them and it can flush out all the waste products. So if you think of yourself as an organism, when you're awake, you do different things than when you're asleep, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're awake, you take in nutrition, you take in resources, you take in fluid, you take in calories, you do work with that, whatever that is, cognitive work, physical work, doesn't matter. You produce waste products, you go to the bathroom, you produce those waste products, you sweat, right? You exhale waste products. And then you go to sleep and you behave slightly differently, right? And you aren't taking in nutrients, but you're trying to clean up your waste products, right? And so this is what's happening when you go to sleep. So you're becoming anabolic. Your immune system's functioning at its highest. It's fighting off bacteria, viruses, parasites, whatever it needs to. The immune system is really the same thing that repairs damaged tissues, right? So if I exercise really hard, or if I get a little bump, I take a little fall, I have a little injury, I twist my ankle, that's being repaired during deep sleep, right? That's anabolic, the most anabolic I'll be. I'm flushing out all the waste products. I'm restoring all the glycogen. I'm restoring the balance of neurotransmitters. I'm balancing all my hormones. And then I transition for about 60, 90 minutes of deep sleep. And I start coming back up. I go through stage 2, and this time I go into REM. And when I go into REM, I start working with what I've learned. I start working with the emotions. I start working with muscle memory, things that I've learned. Like I'm working on my neocortex now. And I'm forming durable pathways. I'm putting short-term memory into long-term memory. I'm emotionally categorizing, and I'm working with whatever I've learned, whether it's shooting, playing a guitar, juggling, whatever it is, typing, like whatever it is I've learned physically to do. And then I do a really, really, really short REM, my first sleep cycle. And then once I drop out of REM and I go back through stage 2, start going down into deep sleep again, that's called one sleep cycle. And that's 90 to 120 minutes. Now, the next sleep cycle has less deep sleep and more REM. And the next has less deep sleep and more REM. And by the time you get to the morning, That last sleep cycle is almost 100% REM. The first sleep cycle is almost 100% deep. So depending on where you short yourself of sleep, that's what you're shorting yourself of. If you go to bed at 2 a.m., you're going to do way less deep sleep. You're going to get more REM sleep. If you wake up at 4 a.m., you're going to get way less REM sleep, right? If you go to bed at 10, you get up at 4, you lost pretty much 2 hours of REM sleep. And these are the types of symptoms will correlate with that, right? It makes sense that that's what you're depriving yourself of. Now we're super resilient. And when I learned about all of this, I was actually surprised that any of us were alive, right? Because I'm sitting there looking at these guys who have 99% stage 2 sleep every night. I'm like, and they've been doing this for years. I'm like, well, how are they alive? Like, how are they recovering at all? Like, and I don't have the answer to that, right? Like, I don't. Like, they're doing it somehow, but they're decaying, and they're decaying really quickly, which is
they're not fully recovering. They're aging, but it takes some time.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I'm saying when you look at their labs, if I would have given those labs to my colleague and say, tell me who this guy is, that's a 55-year-old guy who's 40 pounds overweight, who sits down all day and works and is stressed out of his mind and has 5 cocktails every night at the end of his day to decrease his stress. That's who they would have said. But no, again, I'm looking at a 28-year-old in shape, active SEAL who's getting up and getting after it every day, right? So the whole purpose of Sleeping Tonight is using today as a template for what I need to be better at tomorrow to try to repair and possibly get better tomorrow. Wake up a little bit better. And in some areas I'm getting better, right? Like if I study tonight, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to know more tomorrow, right? And the interesting thing about this sleep too is that it doesn't just work at night. It works anytime you do it, right? So so I've worked with MMA fighters, right? So guys who are about to go into, say they're a world-class jiu-jitsu player, but they're going in with a striker. So they've got 6 to 8 weeks to cram on their striking. Well, what we've learned through research is if you come in the morning and I teach you something, and then I say, come back at 7 o'clock tonight and let's test you on it. You'll be worse. At 7 o'clock at night, you're going to come back. You won't be as good as you left training, right? So if we train for an hour or two, come back at 7 o'clock at night, you're going to be a little worse than you left training at. There's going to be some decay. Interestingly, with no more training, you go home and you go to sleep. When you come back the next morning, you'll be better than you left that first training session at. So you actually improve. What's interesting is if I do that same thing and I say, and this could be anything, right? So it could be
push-ups.
It could be like learning to type with just your left hand, like anything random, doesn't matter. Test you in the morning, say, I want you to take a nap today around noon to 2, somewhere around there, like try to get an hour nap in, and then come back at 7 o'clock. When you come back at 7 o'clock, you perform exactly as if you'd slept that night. So you come back better than you finished your training. And now we can train again, and then you can go to sleep. And then you can come back the next day.
So you double the recovery basically, and the performance increase.
And if you're fortunate enough, like some guys, and usually, and when you're younger, it's easier. Some guys are actually capable of taking 2 really good naps a day.
Wow.
So if they can take 2 really good naps a day, we can train in the morning, nap, train in midday, nap, train in the evening, go home and go to sleep. They're learning 4 times as fast. So and you can prove this with anything. Now, the key is you still have to sleep 8 hours at a minimum. So actually, when you're an athlete and you're really, really straining your body, you probably need at least 9 hours. And some people might need up to 10. But if you do the nap thing during the day, so this is interesting. So like, let's say we do training, nap, go home, go to sleep, but you only sleep 6 hours instead of 8 hours. You aren't any better than if you just would have done a day of training, went home and gone to sleep.
Wow.
So you lose the benefit of it. So the naps are a great additive tool, but the foundation that you can't get away from is the full nighttime, what we call the nocturnal sleep. And then just like I was saying, if you think of your body like an organism that does different things when it's awake than it does when it's asleep, every cell in your body does that. So when people talk about the circadian rhythm, that's one of those job security words.
Sure.
Doctors and scientists, we use big words so people think we know what we're talking about. We're smart. Circadian rhythm doesn't mean anything, right? It's Latin. It's circa is about dias a day. So it's about a day rhythm is what it means. So duh, I have about a day rhythm.
I have a day rhythm.
Whoa,
yeah, sure.
Shocker. Right. I go to sleep every night. I wake up every morning and I have I have a rhythm about that. It's weird. But the important thing is that the ideal as we evolved to use the sun as our cues to when to be awake and when to be asleep. And we can talk more about that if you want. And that's the entrainment of us being on the planet. That's the entrainment of the season, right? So that's not the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm exists whether the sun existed or not, right? If you put somebody in a cave and they had no access to sunlight, the male circadian rhythm is slightly longer than 24 hours and the females are slightly shorter. So if you just did artificial lighting and you just guessed like when you feel like you've been awake for 16 hours and you're going to sleep 8 hours and then you're going to get up the next day, like if you just used your body's cues to when to go to sleep and when to wake up, you're going to drift about 20, 30 minutes per day. So by the end of 2 weeks, you're going to be 12 hours out of phase, essentially, right? Like you're going to be awake. Now, because we have this rhythm, now we use the sun as a way to stay on track with the environment because we're a visual animal and we need the sun to be able to see to do what we do, right? We suck at night. Like we suck in the day, honestly. It's like, what could we fight without a weapon? Like I wouldn't fight a raccoon without a weapon, right? It's like, we're not really good predators without weapons.
Good point.
So we're really vulnerable at night because we can't see at night and we can't fight that great anyway. And we can step off of cliffs and fall into holes and not see animals that we would have seen that were predators to us and all sorts of things. So we evolved to be asleep at night and be awake during the day. And so that's how our circadian rhythm is best managed. So we use the sun and we try to stay on track with the planet. But like I said, whether we had the sun or not, the circadian rhythm still happens. And so my liver cell and my kidneys and my gut and my testicles and my brain, like everything in my brain behaves different, or every part of my body behaves differently when it believes I should be asleep, whether I'm asleep or not.
Right.
This is why the shift work is so damaging. Right.
Yeah.
So so the World Health Organization classifies shift work as a type 2A carcinogen.
Damn.
Which is the same categorization as cigarettes, which means what type 2A means is that we're almost certain that it causes cancer or that it causes a very big increase in risk in cancer, right?
Wow.
But it would be unethical to study it. So we can't ever get out of type 2A, right? So type 2A just means like, we're positive it's there, but we can't study it because that would be unethical.
So what is that telling us, Doc? Is that just saying that because you're not sleeping normally, you're not going through this recovery cycle, that now you have this stress that is now becoming chronic over long term, and then cancer is linked to chronic stress?
Well, you're active, awake, and active when every cell in your body thinks you should be asleep. So how do we get around that? Anytime we're lacking resources, we do the same thing. We secrete more stress hormones. So you think of somebody like a cop who has probably the most stressful job in the world already.
Easily.
Right? And now they're doing night shift. So now they're doing all of this when every cell in their body thinks they should be asleep. They're out there doing this stressful job, cranking up their stress hormones. Now they're going to go home and try to go to sleep when every cell in their body thinks they should be awake. And so now you're secreting stress hormones because your body thinks you're awake and you're secreting cortisol. Your cortisol is what wakes you up in the morning. Like I said, when you're in deep sleep, you have almost no cortisol. over the course of the night, the cortisol keeps coming up and up and up and up. And at some point, it's high enough where it will wake you up without an alarm, without a sun, without any noise. You'll just wake up because your stress hormones are high enough. Now, the converse of that is your stress hormones have to get lower than that for you to be able to go to sleep. Well, if you're running around stressed out of your mind all the time and your sleep, and let's face it, there's no difference between living like 180 degrees out, like completely opposed to your circadian rhythm. There's no difference between that and sleep deprivation. So even if I'm sleeping 8 hours a day, but I'm doing it 12 hours out of phase, I have the same consequences because I don't get the same sleep quality. When I do a sleep study on it, it doesn't look the same. You don't get enough sleep. So it's about the same as sleeping about 6 hours a night, which is what a chronic insomniac averages over their lifetime, is about 6 hours a night.
Wow.
And the first research that came out was, hey, people who chronically take sleep drugs, which is only defined in medicine as over 6 months. People who chronically take sleep drugs die on average 12 to 14 years younger than their peers. Now, I don't think it has anything to do with the sleep drugs, because when you look at somebody who's a chronic insomniac, it's the exact same thing. And when you look at somebody who works shift work their whole career, it's the exact same thing. So a cop that works shift work for 20 years dies on average 12 to 14 years younger than their peer, than somebody who doesn't do that. And of course, being a cop, stressful job, high stress hormones, high catabolic, poor diet for the most part, right? If you're working shift work, what's open for
Where
you
can you eat?
Where? Yeah. Like if you're not super disciplined and making your own meals and bringing them to work, and that it just doesn't happen. So they're using a lot of stimulants. They're having to use sedatives to help them go to sleep because they're coming home when the sun's up and they've been in, like, a cop, he may finish his last call an hour before he gets off work. And it could have been like a domestic violence with guns and knives involved. And he's halfway in fight or flight, and he's coming home and he's like, oh, now's my time to sleep. And I gotta be up by 6 p.m. to get ready for work again. Right. So, worst case scenario, but we do it to ourselves too. Like, the teams, a lot of people don't know that it's kind of like a job fair, and like we're pitching our wares, and they go, yeah, you can do it. And that's a last minute decision, and go, okay, we got 2 days to prep for this. Nobody's sleeping for the next 2 days. And then we're going on the 2-day op. Right. And, that's just not, and so our sleep is chaotic, right? Cause we have chaotic around sleeping, or chaotic sleep around training and around the actual job. So, that usually leads to just heightened stress hormones, which leads to poor quality of sleep and difficulty sleeping.
You know something, Doc, as I think back at it over the years, when I probably had my worst sleep, there were some other things associated with that, like school, athletics, preparing for spec ops job in my future. So I was burning the candle at both ends. Staying up late studying, not remembering what I studied, trying to get better physically, getting injured physically, all these little things kind of occurred. And then I think the other time that it occurred was when we had newborns in the house. And then sleep just completely threw to a point where I don't even remember my kid's first year of life. Right. I mean, that is a sign that sleep affects everything.
Yeah. So here's the probably the worst news I have for everybody listening. The average family, the average couple. So the average couple will lose 6 months of sleep in the first 2 years of their kid's life, which is 25%, right? So that basically means you're going to, if you are lucky enough to be somebody who slept 8 hours a night, you're going to average 6. Now, if you're like most of us and you're averaging 6 already,
right? Yeah.
And now you're still going to lose 25% of that. And I was smart enough to, like I told you earlier, like I'm a blunt force, work your way to the top guy. I'm like, never claimed to be smart. So I was working when I was in college. I was married, had kids, and I was going to college full time, obviously, and I was working part time. And because I'm really smart and a SEAL, like I knew I needed to stay in shape. So I was like
Of course, you
competing
worked
in
out too.
powerlifting. So I was doing my hour and a half workout every day for powerlifting, and then trying to do enough cardio to stay alive. And then when I got into the end of medical school, when I was at the hospitals in medical school, so the last 2 years you're in the hospital, and then you do your first year of residency, which we call the internship in the Navy. So for those 3 years, I always struggled with the endurance aspect of the SEAL teams. Primarily
powerlifting football player. Yeah.
Because I'm a power athlete, right?
Yeah,
like
sure.
I can jump really high, I can lift a lot, I can sprint really fast, but like give me a 6 mile run and like, boy, I'm suffering, right?
You got to bring your game base.
Yeah. So, and I'm just a big guy, right? Like I'm 250 now, but I'm not as lean as I was in the teams. But in the teams, I was like 230, 240, 235. It's like way too much muscle. And so, but I was just like, man, I'm going to be good I'm going to finally get good at endurance. So I decided I was going to start doing triathlons during my third and fourth year of medical school and my first year of residency.
That's a lot to juggle, Doc.
So I was sleeping on average 4 hours a night for about 6 years, and doing triathlons on top of that. Well, doing powerlifting at the beginning and then doing triathlons after doing triathlons for 3 years. And the first triathlon I did, Super Frog, right? Like, why wouldn't I, right? The first triathlon,
of course.
Like, I'm a frog, man. Let's do it. So my first triathlon was the Super Frog. I did 4 to 6 triathlons a year for the next 3 years. So I guess the beginning of the 4th year, I did the Super Frog again. I was 7 minutes faster than I was when I started. And I was like, you know what, this isn't my sport. I'm going back to powerlifting. So yeah, I pretty much lift and do jujitsu now. That's what I'm built for. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that I avoided all this stuff and was smart enough to figure it out. Like I did not. Like I beat myself down. And in fact, I was helping the SEALs for probably 2, maybe 3 years before I thought, well, maybe I should apply this to myself, right? Maybe I should actually get 8 hours of sleep myself. And so, I mean, it's really only been since like 2012. So it's been about 10 years for me that I've made sleep a priority. And
you can tell a difference.
It's a huge difference. I mean, you can look at, I can look at pictures of me 10 years ago and I look older than I look now. And I felt older. I was definitely in way more pain. We all have our joint pains from our job, right? Like that destroys all of our shoulders and knees and hips and stuff like that. But like I'm not as strong as I was at the peak of my powerlifting, but
Same.
I'm pretty damn close. I mean, I think if I made it my number one priority, I could probably get to 90% of where I was. When I peaked about 38 is when I totaled over 1800. And I think I could probably get there. I could probably get to, high 16s at least.
Yeah. Well, something I learned after 50, Doc, was 80% is the new 100%.
Yeah.
And that saves me a lot of heartache and pain when I'm dealing with whether I'm dealing with volume of running or I'm dealing with 1 rep maxes or I'm dealing with sprinting. Sprinting, the wheels just fall off. So all of those things, that's my new thing after 50 is 80% is the new 100%.
How old are you?
53.
All right. I'm about to turn 52. Yeah. My 50th. My 50th, like I've never really cared about birthdays. And in fact, probably half my life, I didn't really know how old I was. When somebody asked me, I had to figure it out. I just never really cared. But 50, I mean, guys who go on the teams, we're all the same. Like I never expected to live to 50. Like, that's so damn old. Like why would I even want to live to 50? Right.
Good
like,
point.
And so like 50, I was like, man, that's pretty cool. Like I'm going to be half a century old. Like that's legit. I'm going to have a bash. Like and I mean, I spent like, I don't know, close to 10 grand, got this giant lake house. And I was inviting people in. I was paying everybody's airfare from all over the country. Like, come to my 50th. We're going to have a big party. Everything's catered, bands, ski boats, jet skis. Like it was going to be tits. And March 27th is my birthday, and the whole damn world shut down on March 17th for COVID. So I did my 50th birthday last year. I called it 50 Reloaded, and I did the same thing. So I got the lake house and did the whole thing. Yeah. But that's I don't even know why I said that.
Yeah, no, that's a great segue into this, because I tell people all the time, you can think about recovery two ways. All right. Recovery when you're young is all performance driven. I mean, you don't care about longevity. Right. But you got to learn all the same tools at that point that's going to help you when you're 50 and you're focusing more on adding life to your years, which is longevity. Right. So
that is a great point. I love that. Like this is what I do for a living. I've never thought of it that way, but
that's cool.
That is exactly it. Like it's 100% performance when you're young, because the long game doesn't exist. And now it's like, no, it's all about the long game.
But it's the same, because longevity is the mastery of recovery.
Right.
Optimal performance is the mastery of recovery.
Right. So if you could keep all your hormones the same and keep all your metabolic milieu, like your metabolic strength, the same by eating well and controlling your stress and exercising appropriately and sleeping every night, you could live forever, right? Because you would wake up the same every single day. Yeah. And when we were younger, we were trying to wake up better every day, but just for that day, because we wanted to be better tomorrow. And then the next day I wanted to be better again. And that's as far as I thought, right? Like maybe 6 weeks out, I'm going to peak for something, like peak for a powerlifting meet or something, but like, it was all about being better tomorrow. Great point. And now I'm like, no, I just want to be like as close to that as I could possibly be, because as I said earlier, right, all aging means is that I'm more susceptible to death and disease. So if I can keep my hormones and my metabolic milieu the same, I'm essentially the same age. Like I'm physiologically the same age. So I'm less likely to die from any disease or from any cause. And that's one of the things that pissed me off about the military. When I first started taking these tests, doing these lab panels on everything, on that, every team guy who came in there was in the lowest, probably 10% of the bell curve, maybe 20% tops, right? And you're talking about some of these guys were in their 20s, right? And you're coming in, and these guys have the lowest quintile for sure, right? So if you break that bell curve up into 20% segments, the department chair of UCLA endocrinology, I always blank on his name because it's an unpronounceable word salad, but you're looking up a UCLA age stratification of testosterone. But what he did is he broke that bell curve up into quintiles, just purely observational, like the Framingham study. He wasn't intervening. He was just let's just look. And it wasn't just his data. He went across everybody who would help him with data. And he had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of patients' labs. And then he just watched them for 10 years, just what happens. And the people in the highest quintile, so that's 80% of normal range, right? So that's a total testosterone, and he was doing total, which isn't as important as free and bioavailable, but he was just using total. So let's just say that's 800 to 1,000. It's close to that. It's a little different than that. But so 800 to 1,000, everybody whose total testosterone was in that had the lowest risk of death from any cause and the lowest risk of any disease.
Damn.
Not super surprising, because you would think, all right, well, that's somebody who's metabolically healthy, right?
Sure.
So they would have, right? So they're healthy people. That's why they have high testosterone. But here's what pisses me off. Every quintile you go down, your risk of all-cause disease, so we call it morbidity, mortality. So morbidity is disease, mortality is death. So all-cause morbidity, mortality doubles every quintile you go down. Doubles every quintile,
Wow.
right? Not just, yeah, right? So it's like you go from a risk of 1 to a risk of 2 to a risk of 4 to a risk of 8 to a risk of 16 if you're in the lowest quintile. So every SEAL sitting in front of me was 16 times more likely to have any disease or die from any cause.
In their 20s.
And I couldn't do anything about it.
Damn.
Because the military is not going to let me treat their testosterone.
Yeah.
Well,
would you even want to treat it with adding testosterone, or would you?
No, I wouldn't have added testosterone, but I would have done things to stimulate their testosterone production, and I would have done things to block their estrogen production, and I would have done things to decrease their sex hormone binding globulin so they had a higher free percentage. And that's what I do with most of my clients now. Very few of my clients actually go on hormones,
right,
like I said, until about 50.
Yeah.
All those tricks really don't work anymore. I can't keep you in that upper quintile. But I keep myself in that upper quintile. My doctor and I keep me in that upper quintile, and all my patients I keep in that upper quintile. Nice. Now, you could argue, since this isn't causal, you could say, well, that doesn't mean that they're the same as somebody who's naturally in that. And maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But the odds are,
16 times
probably
less.
True. I mean, it makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. Because we're looking at everything. Like if I was just doing testosterone, I would say, yeah, you're probably right. Like that doesn't matter. It's like having really high HDL, like the good cholesterol, right? That's kind of a genetic thing and a behavioral thing. And having really high HDL is protective against cardiovascular disease. Now, if you take supplements or pharmaceuticals that raise your HDL, does that reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease the same? Like we don't know, but we think it probably does. So we do it, right? Yeah. So it makes sense to do it. And I'm doing everything. Like I'm looking at everything in there. I'm looking at their insulin sensitivity. I'm looking at their trace elements. I'm looking at, like for us, our guys, I just consulted on a bunch of tier 1 guys a few months ago. Every single one of them had toxic lead levels. Every single one of them had toxic lead levels.
Wow.
I didn't even do the test. They brought the test to me. So their command is testing them for it, and they're not doing a damn thing about it. I'm like, this is going to kill people. This is going to lead to dementia and Alzheimer's and, cognitive decline, as well as health problems. Like this is a very bad thing. Like we can't just let this go on. So I'm doing everything with all my patients. And again, if I took the patient data off and I gave it to my colleagues and said, who do you think this is? They're going to say 25 to 35-year-old healthy, fit male who works out and eats well, and might be a 60-year-old guy, right?
Nice.
So is that going to make you live longer? I don't know.
Make you live better.
You're going to live better, right? We're going to at least add life to your years. We might not add years to your life. We're going to at least add life to your years. And, the whole idea for me, and I think, and all my clients, the reason people work with me is because they agree with me on this, is like, we just want to square that life off, right? It's like, life gets better. You've got to figure it out. You run it as far as you can, and then it just drops straight off and you die, as opposed to this decay over time. And like, I don't know, like I'd rather be able to, skydive and hike and water ski and do jujitsu and work out and until the day I die, and die 5 years younger than like if I just don't do all of that stuff and just kind of decay and like sit in a chair. Like, who cares? Like I'm not about survival. I'm about living.
I'm 100% with you there.
I want to live. I want to live. I want to enjoy it. If I'm not enjoying it, I don't care if I'm still here.
Yeah. Get busy living or get busy dying.
Yeah.
So, Doc, hey, I really appreciate your time on this. I've been fascinated by recovery since I've first figured it out that it was that important.
Yeah.
There was a time when I was like, who cares?
Right.
Like I'm 26 years old. I don't need to worry about this, but you do, because all
Yeah.
that
And
extra drinking you're doing, screwing up your recovery from your workouts and your busy day.
and our community honestly believed that it's just a mind game, right?
Oh
Like
yeah,
we honestly believed that, if you wanted to run 4-minute miles for 6 miles, it was just a gut check. It was like, if you want it bad enough, if you're mentally strong enough, you'll do it. It's like, physiology be damned, and get a little older and you're wiser, and it's like, show me the 250-pound guy that runs 4-minute miles like that. Those guys don't exist. There's a difference between, like, you get smarter, right? And you're like,
sure,
well, okay,
sure.
well, there's some things I can do, some things I can't do. And one of the things you can't do is recover without sleeping.
Yeah.
Period.
100%. So
Nothing
everybody, I'm going to turn everybody on to you, Doc. So docparsley.com, and that's PARSLEY, docparsley.com. You got to check it out. The website is fantastic. If you want to read more about sleep, all you got to do is click that little blog section. You have over 100 articles in there. I've read most of them, and they're really good, very helpful. Also, your folks over there at docparsley.com sent me a coupon code called Tactical Fitness, where if you put in Tactical Fitness in the coupon code, you save 10% off your Doc Parsley sleep remedy and other things that you sell. There's also a subscription to this too, which you can also save 10% on as well. So Tactical Fitness coupon code over at docparsley.com.
Yep. Yeah. And just so your audience knows, there's no kind of pharmacological trick to that supplement. It's truly a supplement, meaning that you have all that stuff in you anyway, and we're supplementing it. And so, like, when I work with my clients, what I tell them is, I say, there's an ideal way to live. If you wanted to put 100% of your energy into living in an ideal way, and sleeping exactly at the right time and the right amount, and eating exactly the right way, and exercising there, like, there's an ideal. Like, it might be hard to find, but there's an ideal. And then there's a reality, right? Because the reality is, like, you got a
life
job,
gets
you
in
got
the way.
Kids, you got things, there's limitations, and you got travel. And so in between ideal and reality, that's where we supplement, right? That's where we mitigate. We add little tricks and tools, whether that's electronic gadgets to help us meditate, or, ice baths to, for lots of reasons. There, hyperbaric oxygen to improve circulation of blood, to get more oxygen to your tissues, and nutritional supplements. And so, when you use the sun as your cue to go to sleep, and we know this because we can, surprisingly, there's like a couple of 100,000 people on the planet who've never experienced electricity, and that still live like hunter-gatherers. There's about 30 tribes of people around the equator, around the world, and they don't have houses, and they don't have cars, and they don't have machines, and they don't have electricity, and they live like our ancestors lived 10,000, 50,000 years ago. And we've studied these people, and just like most people have experienced when you go camping, if you don't use electricity, you feel like sleeping about 3 hours after the sun goes down, because it takes about that long for your brain to change. So you have some ganglion in your eyes, like as I said earlier, we evolved to sleep at night because we're a very visual animal. Like 80% of our brain is dedicated to visual, essentially. So, like, we're a very, very visual animal. We can't see at night, so that's when we go to sleep. So the sun goes down, it stimulates some nerve cells in the back of your eyes, says, hey, the sun went down. And we use blue light as the trick, probably because the sky is blue most of the time, right? And then that triggers some chemical changes in our brain. And one of the first things that triggers is the release of the hormone most people have heard of as melatonin. Now, melatonin does not make you go to sleep. Melatonin starts the cascade of things that make you sleep.
Gotcha.
Your brain has to change. Like we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of chemical changes in your brain all throughout the night, right? So your brain's different to fall asleep than it is to stay asleep. And it's different. And there's different sleep cycles. There's different stages we're talking about. All sorts of regions of your brain is changing concentrations. You're changing energy, like how much energy that part's using, what neurotransmitters using, what neuropeptides, like it's all changing all throughout the night to restore, regenerate, get ready for tomorrow. So that takes about 3 hours. Well, who spends 3 hours getting ready for bed? That's ideal.
Yeah.
What's reality? Maybe 30 minutes.
Yeah,
maybe an hour, but 30 minutes is probably realistic, right? So the idea behind that supplement is like, what would have increased significantly in your brain when you go to sleep? From the time the sun went down to the time you go to sleep, what would have increased significantly? Well, I said melatonin. That leads to the production of a neuropeptide called GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. That is the chemical that slows the brain down that we were talking about, that lowers that resting potential, that makes you quit paying attention to your environment. So all that's in that supplement is the production pathway of melatonin. Tryptophan becomes 5-hydroxytryptophan. You need magnesium and vitamin D3 to make serotonin. Serotonin becomes melatonin. Melatonin starts. There's a tiny bit of melatonin in there, not enough to keep you asleep all night because I don't want to overtake your production of melatonin. And then GABA to slow everything down. And then there's phosphatidylserine in there, which is also a natural nutrient that you get from food that lowers cortisol and lowers your stress hormones because most people have high stress hormones.
Sure.
That's it. I mean, there's no magic to it. It's like, let's try to concentrate what would have happened if you spent 3 hours getting ready for bed. Your brain still has to do all the work. Your body still has to be healthy. You have to do everything else right. This just enhances your ability to sleep.
Right. Gives you the tools so you can go through the
right. I always say
it's
like I'm bringing lumber to the construction site.
Yeah.
I'm not building anything. Like you have to have the construction crew or nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, it makes sense. As soon as I read the ingredients, I was like, oh, this makes sense. Because if you're missing out on your sunlight, what are you missing out on? D3. Right. So you got some D3 in there. Right. And then, what else you got?
We're almost all of us we're magnesium deficient because our soil is depleted of magnesium. Magnesium is, somewhat of a sedative. Like it's
a great electrolyte that makes you go to sleep and use the bathroom.
Yep.
So, yeah. And vitamin B. How about vitamin B? Why is that in there?
Well,
what does that help you do?
I didn't mention there's L-theanine in there. What L-theanine does is it enhances it enhances the effect of the GABA. Because again, I don't want to overtake anything. I don't want to put so much in you that you quit making it or using your own stores of it. And then the vitamin B in there activates the L-theanine a little more. So it kind of enhances the effect of the GABA.
I like it. Well, once again, Doc, I do appreciate your time. DocParsley.com. You guys check that out. And this is probably my longest running show that I've done. I try to keep it at an hour and a half. And I'm not saying, dang you, Doc, why'd you do that?
Yeah.
It's just so important, right? This is such an important process to master because it is over half of your recovery, right? If you can't get your sleep down, your recovery is crap. It doesn't matter how great you're eating, how great all the extra supplements and massage tools you got and whatever extra things you're doing in that pie chart of recovery. If you're not sleeping, you're overtraining.
The sleep is 90% of it. And the really interesting thing about it is like we all evolved to do this naturally. We don't have to learn how to do it. It feels good. It should be as easy as selling sex, but it is. I mean, people are so resistant to this information because we live in this culture where, the early bird gets the worm, where it's all about embracing the grind and working harder and pushing longer and working more hours. And that's going to be the key to success. Well, it's probably the key to some short-term success, but long-term, it's not worth a damn. It breaks you down. It's the most important thing. And like I said, my job's so hard because if I get somebody to sleep really, really well, they don't remember it, right? They don't remember their sleep, and they're like, "Well, I guess I slept well." Like I don't have any subjective experience of it. I remember falling asleep and I remember waking up. So, I'm sitting here telling you, it's the best thing for anything you care about. Like, this is the magic snake oil. This is the magic elixir. And if you do it great, you won't remember it. So it's kind of hard to get people, and it's contrary to everything you've been taught your whole life as to how to succeed. So it's a tough sale. So that's one of the reasons I think these go so long, is when you hear the logic of it, it's inescapable. You're like,
yes,
okay, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you can know that you can hear what I say and know that that's true without having any science background, and just go, that's obvious. But you just don't think of it that way because that's how we've built our lives.
I love it. Well, folks, you heard it there. 90% of your recovery is due to sleep. So get some sleep while you're young. It focuses on performance. And while you're trying to think about getting older, it's going to help you with your longevity as well. So, yep. Doc, once again, thank you so much. And
yeah, thanks for letting me blather.
Oh, no, that was great. Everybody go check out docparsley.com. And until next time, we'll see you right here at Tactical Fitness Report.